Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Health Path podcast. My name is Alex Manos. I am your host, and I am also the guest of today's episode. So, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of my journey, I guess, ultimately, in the hope that it can help any of you who are currently on your journey. And I'll share some of the lessons that I've learnt along the way, some of the realizations I've had, some of the things that have helped, some of the things that haven't, really to give you insight into what is possible from a healing perspective. And the importance, I guess, ultimately of things like patience, things like compassion, and things like mindfulness. So I have a pretty, I guess, long story to some degree. It was when I was 18 years old in my final year of school that I got officially diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. Um, but I had essentially struggled with digestive symptoms from probably, I think, 5 years of age. And those symptoms waxed and waned over the years, obviously. But in my teenage years, they certainly were at their worst, with things like severe constipation, not going for bowel movements for several days, interspersed with episodes of diarrhea when I finally was able to go. I was really struggling with lots of food reactions. Some of this I've shared previously on podcasts, but there's always a memory I have of my mum always having a little giggle at me because I'd be standing at the fridge with the door open for 10, 15, 20 minutes trying to figure out what could I have for lunch or dinner, because I knew that I would essentially just react to anything. And I think there are some really important lessons that I, over several years, learned that I want to share today, ultimately, in the hope that they can be of benefit. Now, some of you will know a little bit of my story, but essentially, when I was 5 years old, I had an episode in the toilet. Is a way to introduce it. So I went to the toilet. I was in an art lesson at the time. I remember this quite distinctly. And as you do at that age, when you're going for a number one, I went to the urinal, I pulled my shorts and pants down to the ankles, and then I had an episode of diarrhea ultimately. And feeling incredibly embarrassed and awkward, I then had to walk through the school where the wife of the headmistress found me, cleaned me up. My mum came and picked me up. But from that, in many ways, traumatic experience or very embarrassing experience, especially at that sort of age, I refused to go to the toilet at school ever again, certainly in primary school. And as you can imagine, that leads to some unhealthy belief patterns, some unhealthy behaviors that very quickly contributed to suffering with constipation. Because even if I wanted to go to the toilet at school, I just wouldn't go. And I feel that that was one of the things that contributed to essentially having chronic digestive issues that over time just got worse and worse ultimately. Then going into teenage years, where there are certain changes happening physiologically with things like puberty, with the introduction of socializing and alcohol, and quite frankly, at that point in time, a relatively unhealthy diet. I think all of these things just exacerbated those underlying imbalances, which led to finally being diagnosed at 18 with irritable bowel syndrome. And it was certainly that 17 to 18-year-old time periods when my symptoms were at their most acute. And that would include crippling abdominal pain. I would be in the fetal position in bed with cramps, experiencing considerable pain. But with that came terrible skin health. So I had very bad acne and a little bit of psoriasis. And I had levels of fatigue as well. I was napping in the afternoon. At that point in life, I was at boarding school. I had been a very keen athlete, but it got to a point where I was essentially in bed in the afternoon. Everyone else was out playing sports, and I was taking an hour nap and not really able to function anymore. Previous to that, I had had a long list of injuries. So between the years of, let's think about this, 15 to 16 through to 18 years old, I was plagued by injuries. And I definitely feel now, looking back, that there was a strong relationship between what was going on within my digestive system and my immune system, with a lot of low-level inflammation, and musculoskeletal conditions. And that's what really sparked my initial interest in health and fitness. So seeing so many physiotherapists, osteopaths, massage therapists over that 2-3 year period, it sparked an interest in the human body. And I was very fortunate that from the age of probably 16, I knew I wanted to go into personal training. I loved exercise, I loved training, I loved being in the gym, and it seemed just the perfect fit. And I did go on to become a personal trainer. But it was really when I was that period of 18, once I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, through to maybe 21 years old, where I started to understand the role that nutrition can play within irritable bowel syndrome and gut health issues, as well as obviously overall health. And there was a period where I went onto a comprehensive elimination diet, as many people have tried. But I did that simultaneously with some hypnotherapy that was focused around gut health. And at the time, and I can only assume it's still the case, there are essentially sort of gut-centered hypnotherapy practices and practitioners. And in that 4-week period of having 4 sessions of hypnotherapy, of being on a comprehensive elimination diet, my symptoms completely and utterly improved. And not only am I talking about digestive symptoms here, such as the quality of the bowel movement, such as things like bloating and abdominal pain, excuse me, but also lower back pain from a rugby tackle that I experienced when I was 17. My sleep improved massively. I'd always been a very light sleeper. But I slept like a baby during that time. I slept all the way through the night. I did not wake once. And I woke, for the first time in memory, really, incredibly refreshed. At my worst, I could wake up in the morning feeling both exhausted, but with essentially arthritic ankles. I used to have to hobble my way to the bathroom to urinate in the morning. And I didn't think too much of it, if I'm honest, for a long period of time. I kind of just got on with things, knowing that after an hour and a hot shower, etc., those aches and pains and the tightness that I was experiencing in joints would start to alleviate, and I'd be able to get on with my day. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, that's open to debate, but it certainly allowed me to get on with life, which I guess in some ways is the first lesson out of all of this, which is, even when we are suffering with symptoms that are preventing us from doing certain things we love, there is still a balance to be had with our mindset, one of the better words, in regards to whether we allow these symptoms to dominate our life and they essentially take on everything for us, or whether actually to some degree we muscle through and we continue doing what we can do, and things that we enjoy. So I was still able to do certain levels of exercise. My fatigue certainly wasn't that bad. So I could still get in the gym and I could lift some weights and I could do rowing and cycling. I just wasn't able to play competitive sport like rugby or sprinting, for example, anymore. So I focused on what I could do. And that, I think, looking back especially, made a huge difference to my journey, because it never took over my entire life. It certainly had an impact in my life, but I was always looking for things that I could do, things that I could improve at, things that I could master within the context, obviously, of things that also I still enjoyed to do. And that's a really important part of this process, I think. But going back to, I guess, my story briefly, it was because of that experience with the comprehensive elimination diet and hypnotherapy that I decided I wanted to certify in nutritional therapy. So I went off to the Institute of Optimal Nutrition. I did a 3-year part-time diploma, graduated, and then went straight into a degree in nutritional therapy. So I jumped onto the third year at the Centre for Nutrition Education and Lifestyle Management, or CNELM, in Wokingham. I got my degree, and then I went on to get my master's in personalized nutrition, which I did part-time over 2 years. And during that time, I also certified with the Institute for Functional Medicine. So I became an IFM-CP, as they call it, as well, which just stands for Institute for Functional Medicine Certified Practitioner. And that probably takes us to me being 32, 33 years old, practicing functional medicine, having certified, having my master's degree, being a personal trainer. I've qualified in NLP and in life coaching as well. And things were pretty good. I felt like I was on a good trajectory. I was doing what I loved. But I think as experience grew, and as naturally what happens is you start seeing slightly more complex clients, I started to see more and more clients where the basic interventions weren't having the same sorts of impact that they were with some of my previous clients. And then obviously you go back to the drawing board, you open your books and you try and figure out what you're missing. And sometimes that was just greater information and education on a condition, a topic, the human body. So learning more about SIBO as the research came out and as anecdotal evidence grew, slightly changing how we practice from that perspective. But the other big thing for me, and this is kind of a personal thing, is the emotional, cognitive, spiritual element of health. And I guess over the last 3 years, that's something that has really intrigued me and where a lot of my attention has been. So exploring how trauma, how stress, how our emotional well-being, how our cognitive well-being, and how our spiritual well-being all play a significant role within overall health. And this cannot be underestimated. So to give you a little example immediately, a week and a half ago, I spent 6 days with Transformational Breath UK, doing a 6-day seminar in Transformational Breath. We had 2 to 3 sessions per day. We had facilitators all at a one-to-one level supporting us through those breath sessions, palpating, applying touch, doing some body work. And on the 5th day, I had a huge emotional release, as anyone who's done breath work, or a lot of people who have done breath work, will have experienced. And it was a combination of things that came up for me that I'll probably touch on in a future podcast. So I won't go into necessarily today. But what I have found since then is there have been significant changes to my own well-being, to my own health, and to my own behaviors. So for example, my eating patterns and habits have immediately changed. With no conscious effort, I no longer snack or graze, which is something I have a tendency to do, especially if I'm feeling a little bit stressed. But without thinking about trying to cut this out, the last week and a half, I have not done any snacking or grazing. I've had my 2 or 3 square meals a day, and I have felt brilliant. I've had no need to open the fridge or the cupboard mid-morning, mid-afternoon as a bit of a comfort break. And I find that really interesting. But also my histamine type symptoms have significantly improved. There are still some there, but they're much less significant, much less significant. And I've also been eating more histamine foods, which is, I think, really makes this interesting. And for me, it makes complete sense. We know that if we take histamine, which is a potentially key part in people's digestive symptoms, it's very common to have histamine issues when you struggle with chronic SIBO or chronic infections of different types. And we know that there are 2 specific immune cells that store histamine within them. One of them is the mast cell, and we know that stress degranulates it, breaks down the mast cell, and will contribute to the release of histamine, which then could contribute to certain symptoms of histamine intolerance. And they are a long list of symptoms influencing most bodily systems. So it can contribute to changes in blood pressure, especially low blood pressure. It can contribute to things like abdominal pain and diarrhea. It can contribute to insomnia. Histamine is quite a stimulatory substance. It can obviously contribute to allergy type symptoms, so redness, sinusitis type symptoms, inflammation, swelling. I always in clinic give the example of the scene in Hitch with Will Smith when he eats the seafood and ends up in the pharmacy looking for antihistamines because his lip, his eyelid, his ear have all completely ballooned out. And part of that allergic response is mediated by histamine. And I've certainly had significant histamine intolerance and issues over the years. For example, it took me a while to figure this out, but there are certain wines that are very high in histamine. And what I found was that when I went to one pub to catch up with a friend, I'd have just one glass of red wine. I would go home and I just would not be able to sleep till probably 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And the thing that kept me up was a really rushing mind. I was really aware that thoughts were just constantly coming into my head, and I really struggled to be able to quieten the mind. Ultimately, it was really sort of hyper vigilant and going at 100%. Having said that, I could go to a different pub, have a glass of red wine and not have any issues. And I finally connected the dots that it was related to a wine. And we know that histamine can be a little bit stimulatory. So it's my assumption that there's a really strong connection there. And people I've spoken to have often found this as well. I've had a lot of clients start to take a natural antihistamine, something like quercetin, before bed, and it has made a profound difference to their sleep. So we can see that histamine, when in excess, so to speak, can contribute to sleep issues, which can then feed in to digestive symptoms as well, because we know there's a strong relationship between our sleep and our digestive symptoms and the severity of them the following day. But histamine can also contribute to anxiety type symptoms as well. Again, it's stimulatory, so it can impact us from that perspective. It can also impact the monthly cycle in women, so it can contribute to issues with the period, for example. So there's a really long list of symptoms that histamine gets involved with. But what I've found is, even though I've been consuming more histamine foods over the last week and a half, a lot of my symptoms have been a lot better. So for example, my ability to breathe through my nose is 1,000 times better than it was a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. So it's really interesting for me that there is a strong relationship, I think, between our emotional well-being, between, if I just use the term very generally, stress, and what is going on in our body from a physiological perspective. So when we're struggling with irritable bowel type symptoms, when we're struggling with chronic SIBO or any other chronic symptom, I just think it's really important to appreciate that while suffering with those sorts of symptoms can contribute or be the main reason why we then are dealing with a bit of anxiety or stress, that anxiety or stress is still impacting our ability to heal from the underlying issue that's contributing to the symptoms that we're getting stressed, frustrated, angry, or anxious about. So it's not that it's all in the head or that you just need to go and have therapy, but we do need to appreciate that we need to be supporting ourselves in that area of health while also supporting ourselves improve digestive health through some of the other interventions that we have available to us, whether that's diet, whether that's supplementation with things like pro and prebiotics. But please, please, please do not underestimate the role that stress management plays within this. And I use stress management just because it's the common term that we use to I guess, as an umbrella term for whether it's a massage, whether it's breath work, whether it's meditation, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's yoga, or whether it is some form of therapy, these are often needing to be part of our overall picture, because we cannot isolate the digestive system from our other systems. Many of you will have heard me say before that one of the main things that regulates our microbiome is our immune system. So anything that is straining our immune system and diverting our resources towards immunity is going to have an impact on the health and integrity of the digestive system and the microbiome. So whether that's a toxin, whether that is food sensitivities, whether that is stress, whether that's some form of infection, etc., whether it's trauma, whether it's just day-to-day challenges that we're trying to work through, all of these things are going to impact immunity if chronic. And the research shows that increases our risk to viral infections, to dysbiosis, to leaky gut, to SIBO, etc. So we have to take a multi-pronged, holistic approach to this. And really, for me, that is the most important lesson that I have learned, that I try to impart onto my clients these days. Because often foods we think is the underlying cause to our symptoms or our condition. We go and see a functional medicine practitioner or a nutritional therapist or naturopath because we want to understand what foods often we need to remove to feel better. But I think sometimes we need to flip that on its head and consider, yes, there are certain foods that we want to be limiting. And that can be from a generic perspective and a common sense perspective, like the refined carbohydrates and sugars that we may want to limit. There's the personal side of things in regards to specific foods we might be having a sensitivity to, or we might be allergic to or intolerant to. But we also should be focusing on what foods can we incorporate into our diet to nourish and nurture the microbiome and to nourish and nurture the body and also the soul and spirits, because food should be a nourishing experience that has a social element to it as well and a cultural element to it. We seem to be quite fixated on what we need to be removing. And I think a lot of nutritional therapists and health practitioners these days are really encouraging our clients to focus on what can you incorporate into the diet to nourish yourself better. And that can really change our mindset around food, and is a much more empowering and enjoyable journey, I think, rather than focusing on what we may often feel like we're depriving ourselves of. So I think that's a really important concept for everyone just to be mindful of as well. That's not to say that the diets out there don't have a role to play. The way I look at it is the more symptomatic we are and the more we are suffering as a result of those symptoms, the more restrictive we may need to be, for a short period of time. So think about it like a spectrum. The more complex the case and the more suffering someone is experiencing, possibly the more aggressive, the more restrictive, the more we may want to essentially be doing within that health program to get the biggest response possible in the shortest level of time to improve that person's quality of life. And then look to really diversify out once we've stabilized symptoms and we've got people to a level of, I guess, life that they are happy with at that point in time. The problem is if our goal is symptom eradication, then it's tricky, because then we really do have to go into restrictive diets to remove symptoms as quickly as possible. So what I say to clients quite often is we need to accept you're going to have certain symptoms for potentially several months, but we want those symptoms to be tolerable. We want you to be able to get on with your life and enjoy your life. And that may include eating out with the family or eating new recipes or meals with the family. Because we need to focus on the underlying imbalances that are contributing to those symptoms, which potentially food is exacerbating with the consumption of the food, or improving with the removal of the food. But the food, almost, it's like that's what's manipulating the dial of severity of the symptom. It may not be the actual cause of the symptom, if that makes sense. Which is probably a good time to bring in a couple of documents, rather than you just looking at me, especially if you're watching this on YouTube, which I'd recommend, if you can, to at least watch this bit, because I'm now sharing 3 little documents that I'm going to just quickly explain for people. So many of you, if you've worked with a functional medicine practitioner, if you've been onto the Institute of Functional Medicine website, or if you've just read around it, you'll be familiar with these principles. But the Institute for Functional Medicine created their functional medicine tree. Now, this idea is very simple. The idea is, if you have a tree and it is unhealthy, you don't tend to the leaves and the branches, you tend to the roots and the soil. Now, when we think about this from a human health perspective, the roots and the soil represent our sleep and our relaxation, our movement patterns and our exercise levels, our nutrition and hydration, our stress and resiliency, our relationships and community and networks, trauma, microorganisms, and environmental pollutants. Now, based on those, and things like our genetic predisposition that can increase or reduce our susceptibility to certain conditions, but blends that with our previous experiences, our attitudes, and our beliefs, both around health, the human body, what's possible, but potentially larger beliefs as well, along with anything that is influencing our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And then we can start to see how all of these different things can accumulate into imbalances within certain symptoms. So you can see in the trunk of the tree antecedents, triggers, and mediators. And then these symptoms can be kind of organized into different systems, such as the digestive system, the immune system, the hormonal system, the cardiovascular system, the detox system, when we think about things like the liver. And those signs and symptoms, which could be things obviously like bloating, diarrhea, constipation, elevated cholesterol, can then be brought into the branches and the leaves. So if you have digestive symptoms or signs of dis-ease within the digestive system, you'll go and see a gastroenterologist. If you've got issues with cardiovascular health, with elevated cholesterol and things like this, you may go and see a cardiologist, etc. Now, this has a role to play to some degree, but as many of us just intuitively know, this is a very reductionistic approach, and it ignores the fact that all of our bodily systems are interconnected or interrelated, and therefore we can't separate the digestive system from our immune system. We can't separate liver health and not consider what is going on from a digestive system perspective. And the examples go on and on and on. So functional medicine is all about taking a systems biology integrated approach to understanding the human body. It's appreciating that all of these systems are interconnected. So we can't specialize in one system because it's constantly communicating with other systems. And just because you have a lot of symptoms within one system doesn't even mean that's necessarily the one that needs the most support necessarily. It may well indicate that, but again, we always need to go as deep as we can. So this is what we call the functional medicine tree. We need to go to the roots and the soil to ensure that the tree is as healthy as possible. And it's the same for us. We need to go to what's happening in our relationships, what's happening with our stress levels, with our diet, with our exercise, with our sleep, with our previous experiences, attitudes, and beliefs. How are they influencing our current behaviors and our current thought patterns, for example? We also have the functional medicine timeline, which is kind of what I have shared with you already. So this is the idea that the way I describe this is our health is a line of dominoes. And what we're trying to do to a large degree is understand what was the first domino, or what were the first few dominoes that fell over that led to this cascade effect of poor health, poor symptoms, and potentially a continued deterioration of our health if we haven't yet got to the underlying imbalance that has contributed to those symptoms. So here's the functional medicine timeline. Some practitioners, when you see them in clinic, they may even go through this with you, with the document or the A4 piece of paper in front of you. But every naturopath, functional medicine practitioner, nutritional therapist these days, if they're not doing this with you, they're doing it in their heads. This is how they are thinking, basically. So I don't have these documents on my desk, and so these days I often don't share them. But this is how I'm thinking, and this is how kind of my questions are formed ultimately. So what was going on with your parents' health? What was going on prenatal? Were you C-section or vaginal birth? That's going to potentially influence the microbiome and therefore your digestive and immune health moving forwards. Triggers or triggering events are things that we feel could have triggered the onset of symptoms. That could be related to a viral infection. That could be related to a stressful experience or period of stress. It could be related to the start of a medication, which then led to the onset of certain symptoms. Mediators can be thought of as perpetuators. So these are things that are contributing to your current state of dis-ease. And they're not separate to triggers. So you could still be on that medication that is serving a certain purpose, but is contributing to other symptoms potentially as a result. And that could be perpetuating your current state of health. It could be that you are in current stress. It could be related to your nutrition. It could be related to relationships. There are lots of things that you can think of off the top of your head that are going to be perpetuating the current state of affairs. You could even potentially put, lockdown into this as well. This year, there have been certain things that have been perpetuating our state of health, and that sense of loneliness, isolation, the fear that many of us have experienced, whether or not we're consuming sort of the media. These are all things that are potentially maintaining our current state of dis-ease that we just need to be mindful of, and then look for what solutions we currently have at our disposal as a way to remediate some of these things. And then we can obviously think about what are the signs, symptoms, or actual diagnoses that this individual has, and when did they start, as a way to understand a little bit more about what was the first domino or first set of dominoes that fell over, because that may be where we need to focus upon to restore harmony and coherence to all of these different bodily systems. Sorry, my computer seems to be a little bit slow. And then we have the functional medicine matrix. So for those of you that can't see this, don't worry. It's just another document that clinicians will be either using or just being mindful of. And the way to think about this is it's a way of brainstorming our health. So we can put the symptoms or conditions into the different bodily systems. So someone with digestive imbalances, maybe they've been diagnosed with IBS or SIBO, we can scribble down on our notes the fact that they're experiencing bloating, diarrhea, whatever it may be. We can make our notes around the main parts of their diet. Is it lacking omega-3 fatty acids? Is it lacking protein, something that is so important for a healthy immune system? Is it lacking antioxidants and phytonutrients because there isn't enough color within the diet? What's going on with their sleep and their circadian rhythm? Are they getting to bed at a decent hour? Are they waking at a sensible hour? Are they getting 7 to 9 hours-ish of uninterrupted sleep? Are they waking feeling refreshed, or are they really struggling to get going in the morning? What is your libido like? Do you have a strong sex drive or not? That's another key marker of health ultimately. And are we happy within our relationships? It's really important to appreciate the role and significance of the things that we just listed within optimal health and well-being, but recovering from dis-ease as well. We can get really bogged down in the testing, in the nutrition, in the supplementation, and they serve a really important role. But certainly the supplement side of things, they're called that for a reason. They should be supplementing a healthy lifestyle, which means healthy relationships, healthy levels of stress, a good balanced diet to the best of our ability at this point in time, based on how sensitive we may be. It should be including appropriate exercise. That could be some Tai Chi, that could be doing some exercise in the bed if it needs to be because your bed's bound. It's seeing what we can do with the current resources that we have. And some practitioners that I've kind of seen recently, which I 100% agree with, is this idea that potentially we want to first start by trying to optimize sleep. So what can we do to make sure someone's getting restorative sleep, considering that's when we do a lot of our healing, that's when we do a lot of our cellular repair work. And therefore, maybe that should be the foundation of what we're trying to achieve. There are obviously some very basic things that work for some people, such as taking some magnesium or taking an Epsom salt bath. Some people find adaptogens very helpful, things like ashwagandha and rhodiola. I certainly have found them very powerful ways of improving sleep quality. Making sure you're in a cool bedroom and it's not too hot or not too cold. There are lots of things we can do to optimize sleep that really does lay the foundations for the body to start to heal and repair itself. An area that actually I've got really interested in recently is lucid dreaming. So do you dream a lot? And if so, what's going on in those dreams? And actually, is there something for us to reflect on and learn from that perspective? Because certainly with lucid dreaming is when we become conscious within our dreams and we can take control to a large degree of the dream landscape. So we can bring in certain people, characters that we want to communicate with. We can change where we are within the world, within the universe, or elsewhere for that matter. So we kind of take control of the architecture of the dreams, a little bit like the film Inception to some degree. But it is incredibly powerful. And there are some case studies. There's certainly a lot of anecdotal evidence in some of the books that I've read. And if you're interested in the role that dreaming can play within our health and spiritual development, then Charlie Morley is a great guy to follow, who does retreats and webinars and all sorts on this type of stuff. But it's just another example that we need to be mindful of. If we're having a repetitive dream, or if we're having some nightmares, there are things there that we need to be listening to. It is essentially our subconscious, our body telling us that there is something that needs our attention, that we need to reflect on, do some introspection of, etc. But all of this stuff lays the foundations for the diet, for the supplements to be most effective ultimately. So these are some sort of documents and key concepts from functional medicine that we always want to be mindful of ultimately. So I'll stop sharing now. So I hope that's been helpful, everyone. I think lessons for me over the years have been that nutrition doesn't play, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, nutrition doesn't play as big a role as some of us think it does all of the time. Now, that's not to say that nutrition is incredibly important and powerful, but we need to be mindful that it is one tool within a very big toolkit. And I think one of the greatest challenges we have on our journeys is to truly understand deep down what it is that we really need to be doing. And I really think that for a lot of us, that is related to our emotional well-being. I think it's related to our spiritual well-being, and ensuring that we are self-aware and compassionate and mindful. So the reason I use the term self-aware is because we need to be aware of what our values are, what is important to you in life. If you know what your values are, then you can start to live a life that is aligned to those values. And that in itself, I think, can be quite healing. It allows you to put your energy towards things that are meaningful and important to you. And there is a wealth of research showing us the importance of relationships, community, and a sense of purpose in life. So there's one study that showed that our allostatic load is significantly less when we have a sense of purpose in life. And allostatic load is quite a general term for the amount of wear and tear that we are experiencing. And there are various markers we can use to evaluate our allostatic loads. Things like cortisol, blood pressure, waist to hip circumference, cholesterol levels, blood glucose levels, and many others can be used to understand the wear and tear, the allostatic load of an individual. And having purpose in life and having a sense of meaning in life has been shown to lighten that allostatic load. We essentially have less wear and tear, and we are healthier as a result. So one of the things I see, and one of the things that I've experienced to some degree, is when we are only focused on symptoms and getting well, and almost when our world becomes this, we often, in my experience, and it's only my experience, we get stuck and we don't actually get the improvement that we're trying so hard to achieve. But it's clients often who still are able, and I appreciate sometimes, again, this is a sliding scale, this is a spectrum, but if we're able to maintain some sense of autonomy, of competence, if we're able to maintain something that aligns us to our values and our purpose, it changes our energy and it allows for greater healing to take place. So please, if that resonates, sit with it, reflect on it, think about how you can bring in a greater sense of meaning and purpose. And it doesn't need to be huge. We're not talking about solving world hunger and things like this when we talk about purpose. It can be related to your role as a brother, sister, partner, husband, wife, mother, father, etc. It can be about being a kind, warm person day to day. It can be about reaching out to loved ones and ensuring that they're okay and being supportive to others. We can start as small or as big as we have the capacity to do so. But the research is really stacking up that this is important. And any of you who may be doubting this at this point in time, I highly recommend the book When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, Gabormata. And he shares with us some incredible research showing us the role that our emotional well-being plays within health and disease. Now, there's research showing us that there are certain personality types of certain conditions. There's lots of research showing us that our ability to express ourselves and to communicate to others has a profound impact on our health. So without wanting to butcher this point, one of the examples he gives in his book is smokers. Smoking per se does not cause lung cancer. It is not a linear A-B relationship because not everyone who smokes gets lung cancer. But one study certainly suggested that those who smoke and have a reduced ability to express their emotions are at greater risk of lung cancer. The same is true with certain studies with reflux, for example. There's a strong relationship between stress and emotional well-being and reflux. And in fact, the severity of symptoms in those with reflux is not related to the amount of reflux. It's actually related, again, to emotional elements of our existence. And this fascinates me. We know this is true for toxins and infections as well. So you can take two people who you test, let's just say for a heavy metal, for an easy example, maybe mercury. One of them could have significantly greater levels of mercury in the system compared to the other, but could be significantly healthier when looking at various elements if you were to test them, but also if you just looked at how they were functioning day to day. So again, that we need to appreciate the complexities of health, and how resilient we are overall. How resilient are we to all the different stresses that we're being exposed to, not just the sort of the modern day stresses of commuting and financial responsibilities, etc., but the environmental toxins that we're being exposed to, the challenges of the unknown. Take this year, for example. How well have we been able to adapt to a massive change to the way we live our lives? The success we have at adapting to these changes in our environment indicate how resilient we are, as an individual, as a family, as a species. And I love this concept of resiliency. It's something I'm going to be sharing both on the podcast in future episodes, but HealthPath will be doing some webinars on this as well, because I think it's a really important term for all of us to be thinking about. And we can frame everything through the lens of resilience. So for example, how resilient is your microbiome? The more resilient it is, the less change, the less damage, so to speak, you will occur if you do have to take a course of antibiotics. And that resilient microbiome becomes resilient through lifestyle, through exercise, through time in nature, through getting dirty, through eating a diverse range of plant foods and to some degree animal foods as well. All of these things are influencing the resiliency of the microbiome. How resilient is the immune system? Is it overstimulated, and is it sort of responding excessively to some of these environmental exposures? There is research talking about these things. There's research talking about resiliency from a fibromyalgia perspective, from a thyroid perspective, and the list goes on. So I am a huge fan of this topic and concept, and you'll certainly be hearing a lot more about this over coming episodes. Is there anything else that I would like to share at this point in time? I don't think so. I think we'll call it there, everyone. So that is me. I hope it has been somewhat helpful. If you have any questions from today's episode or from other episodes that you have listened to, then reach out to us. You can reach out to us on social media. Our handle is @OurHealthPath. You can reach out to us at hello@healthpath.com. You can reach out to me directly. I'm on social media @Alexander Manos. I'm really, really keen to learn from you guys in regards to who you want on the podcast, who you would like us to do a webinar with that you can join. Would you like the opportunity to do a Q&A with someone? And if so, who would that be? What topics do you want us to cover on the podcast? And is there anything else you think that we can do to support you on your journey? There will be various topics that we cover in this podcast. It's certainly not going to be just gut related, or for that matter, functional medicine related. I recorded an episode this morning that will be out soon on breath work and the role that breathing can play in physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual healing. We'll be talking about mindfulness. We'll be talking about all sorts of things that we feel can be really important tools within the toolkit. And then we can try them out. We can see which ones resonate with us, which leads to the most significant improvement. And we can appreciate that this is a journey that we are all on. And we need partners. We need a team through that journey as well. And we very much hope that we can be part of that for you guys. So that's enough of me waffling on. I hope you've enjoyed it, everyone. Episode 4 is going to be with Dr. Jacoby, aka the SIBO doctor. So I talk with Dr. Jacoby about SIBO, the underlying causes, the different types, some of the things that we might be able to consider from a therapeutic intervention perspective. So I think that will be a really great episode for everyone who suspects or knows they have SIBO to tune into. And we have lots of episodes like that to come that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you all. But until next time, guys, stay healthy, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Health Path podcast.